One of the most damaging misunderstandings among those seeking to grow in Yahusha is the idea that Paul or Sha'al taught that we are saved by favor, as if the commandments don't matter anymore. That's not what he taught. And to be clear from the beginning, this is not a defense of earning deliverance by works. That's not the point. Sha'al or Paul didn't teach that a man can boast before Yahuwah because he performed enough works, kept enough outward markers, or built himself a religious resume. Sha'al fought against the idea clearly. Sha'al fought against that idea clearly. But he also did not teach the opposite error, that favor saves a person into lawlessness, or that belief makes obedience irrelevant. So the question is not, are we saved by our own works? The question is, did Sha'al or Paul teach that favor makes the commandments irrelevant? And when we let Sha'al testify from his own letters, the answer is a resounding no. He didn't preach lawlessness, he preached deliverance from it. Kapha, or 2 Peter 3:15 through 16, gives the warning plainly. Peter says, Sha'al wrote according to the wisdom given to him, but some things in his letters are hard to understand, and the untaught and unstable twist them to their own destruction, just like they do the other scriptures. That warning matters because Peter is not attacking Sha'al. Peter is warning us about the people who twist Sha'al's words. In other words, if someone uses Sha'al to create a doctrine that contradicts the rest of Scripture, Peter already told us what we are looking at. We are looking at a twisted reading. And one of the most common twisted readings is this: we are under grace, not law, so obedience doesn't matter anymore. But Sha'al answers that directly. In Romans, or Romaim 3:31, Sha'al asks, do we then nullify the Torah through belief? And his answer is, let it not be so. On the contrary, we establish the Torah. That should settle the matter. Sha'al doesn't say belief cancels the Torah. He says belief establishes it. That's not my interpretation being forced onto him. That's him answering the question directly for himself. If someone says belief means the Torah is nullified, Sha'al says let it not be so. So right off the start, we need to make a distinction. Sha'al is not teaching that Torah observance is the source of deliverance, but he is also not teaching that deliverance destroys obedience. Those aren't the same claim. One is boasting in works, the other is walking in the fruit of deliverance. Sha'al rejects boasting, but he doesn't reject righteousness. Then he presses the same point in Romans, or Romaim 6. In Romans, or Romaim 6, 1 through 2, he asks, shall we continue in transgression so that favor may increase? And again, his answer is, let it not be so. That is the exact question being argued today. Can we continue in transgression because we have favor? Sha'al says no. Not softly, not vaguely, not in a hidden footnote. Let it not be so. Then in Romans, or Romaim 6:15, he asked it another way. Shall we transgress because we are not under law but under favor? And again he answers, let it not be so. So when people quote, not under law but under grace, they often stop before Sha'al explains what he actually means. He immediately says that being under favor is not permission for us to transgress the law. That matters, because if your interpretation of not under law produces permission to break the commands, then your interpretation directly contradicts Sha'al or Paul's own explanation in the same chapter. His point is not that favor makes rebellion acceptable. His point is that favor changes the master you serve. Romans, Romaim 6:16, says that you are servants of the one you obey, either transgression unto death or obedience unto righteousness. That's not a lawless message. That's deliverance language. Sha'al is dealing with masters. He's asking, who owns your obedience now? If transgression still owns the body, if rebellion still gives the orders, if the flesh still sits on the throne, then we have not understood the deliverance he's describing. He's not describing a man who has been declared free so he can return to the old prison. He's describing a man transferred out of one reign and brought under another. That's why he speaks of obedience unto righteousness. This matters because the modern misunderstanding usually treats favor like a legal loophole. It makes favor sound like Yahuwah found a way to pretend rebellion is obedience. But Sha'al never presents favor that way. Favor is not Yahuwah calling darkness light. Favor is Yahuwah rescuing a man from darkness and training him to walk in the light. So if our understanding of favor leaves a person comfortable in the very thing Messiah came to redeem him from, we've misunderstood favor. Favor is not a cloak for rebellion. Favor is the rescue that pulls us out of it. It cleanses the captive and trains him to walk clean. Then Sha'al gives us his actual view of the Torah in Romans, or Romaim 7. In Romans, Romaim 7:12, he says, the Torah is set apart and the command is set apart, righteous and good. These are not the words of a man trying to convince you that the command is wicked, useless, or irrelevant. Set apart, righteous, good. That is his language. Then in Romans 7:22, he says, I delight in the Torah of Yahuwah according to the inward man. Again, that doesn't sound like someone who hates the Torah. That doesn't sound like someone who believes the commandments are the enemy. That sounds like someone who understands the difference between the flesh and the inward man. The problem is not the Torah. The problem is the flesh. Sha'al says that plainly in Romans 8:7. The mind of the flesh is hostile toward Yahuwah because it doesn't subject itself to the Torah of Yahuwah. The verse is the blade. The fleshly mind refuses to submit to the Torah of Yahuwah. So when a doctrine produces hostility toward the commandments, we should ask a serious question. Is that doctrine coming from the Ruach or the Spirit? Or is it echoing the flesh? Because Sha'al doesn't describe submission to the Torah of Yahuwah as the problem. He rather describes refusal to submit as the problem. Then we go to 1 Corinthians or Corinthium Rishon 7:19. Sha'al says circumcision is nothing and uncircumcision is nothing, but guarding the commands of Yahuwah is what matters. The verse is simple. He's cutting through the outward status fight. He's saying the badge is not the point. The fleshly marker is not the point. Ethnic status is not the point. Religious boasting isn't the point. What matters? Guarding the commands of Yahuwah. That's Sha'al, not Peter, not James, not someone allegedly contradicting him. That is Sha'al in his own letters. So if someone says Paul taught the commandments don't matter, then 1 Corinthians or Corinthian Rishon 7:19 stands directly in the way. And we can see the same pattern when he talks about freedom. In Galatium or Galatians 5:13, he says we were called to freedom, but not to use that freedom as an occasion for the flesh. Instead, through love, we are taught to serve one another. That is important because people often hear the word freedom and immediately imagine no restraint, no standard, no command, no accountability. But Sha'al doesn't define freedom as flesh permission. He defines it as deliverance from the old master so we can walk by the Spirit. Then in Galatians or Galatium 5:16, he says to walk in the Ruach or Spirit, and we shall not accomplish the desire of the flesh. Again, he's not saying you have favor now, so the flesh doesn't matter. He's saying the opposite. Walk by the Spirit so the flesh doesn't rule you. Then he lists the works of the flesh and says plainly that those practicing such things shall not inherit the reign of Yahuwah. That doesn't sound optional. That doesn't sound like Sha'al saying conduct is irrelevant. That sounds like Sha'al warning people not to confuse favor with permission. In Galatians 6:7-8, he says, Yahuwah is not mocked. Whatever a man sows, that shall he also reap. The one sowing to the flesh reaps corruption, but the one sowing to the Spirit reaps everlasting life. Again, it's not lawlessness. That is a warning about what kind of seed a man's planting. Then we need to handle Ephesians 2 honestly, because this is one of the most quoted passages in the whole discussion. Ephesians, Ephsaim 2:8-10, says we are saved by favor through belief, and that not of ourselves. It's the gift of Yahuwah, not by works, so that no one should boast. That part is true, and we shouldn't weaken it. We are not saved by boasting in our own works. We are not delivered because we can present Yahuwah with a receipt and say, you owe me. Deliverance is not a wage we force from his hand. It's favor, it's mercy, it's his gift. But Sha'al doesn't stop at verse 9. Verse 10 says we are his workmanship, created in Messiah Yahushua for good works, which Yahuwah prepared beforehand that we should walk in them. So the full picture isn't saved by favor, therefore no obedience. The full picture is saved by favor, not by boasting in works, but created in Messiah Yahushua for good works prepared by Yahuwah. That's the balance. Not saved by works as the root, created for good works as the fruit. And if you cut off verse 10, you have not let Sha'al finish his sentence. That's where a lot of the confusion comes from. People hear not by works and they turn it into not for good works. But Sha'al says the opposite. We are not saved by works as a boast, but we are created in Messiah for good works as the walk. That's not lawlessness, it's transformation. That is the rescued people learning to walk in what Yahuwah prepared. That's why the objective reading matters. If we only quote verses 8 and 9, we can make it sound like Sha'al is rejecting all obedience. But when verse 10 is allowed to speak, the balance returns. Favor's the root, good works are the fruit. The root doesn't come from the fruit, but a living root produces it. If there is no fruit at all, there is no righteousness, no correction, no obedience, no turning away from lawlessness. Then we are no longer describing the work Sha'al is describing. He's not giving dead belief a throne. He's describing a life that's rebuilt by Yahuwah. Then Titus 2 seals the matter. In Titus 2:11-14, Sha'al says the saving favor of Yahuwah has appeared, teaching us to deny wickedness or worldly lusts and to live soberly, righteously, and reverently in this present age. Notice what favor teaches. Favor teaches us to deny wickedness. Favor teaches us to reject worldly lusts. Favor teaches us to live righteously. Favor teaches reverence. That's the opposite of lawlessness. Then Sha'al says Messiah gave himself for us to redeem us from all lawlessness and cleanse for himself a people zealous for good works. Not unto lawlessness, but from lawlessness. Not indifferent to good works, but zealous for good works. That is Sha'al's doctrine of favor. Favor is not permission to stay dirty. Favor is the mercy of being washed, trained, corrected, and brought into set-apart living. When someone says, Paul taught we are free from obedience, Titus 2 answers back, Messiah redeemed us from lawlessness. When someone says good works don't matter, Titus 2 answers back, Messiah cleansed the people zealous for good works. So we have to be honest about the whole witness here. Sha'al does reject justification by boasting in works, but he also rejects lawlessness. Sha'al rejects flesh-based confidence, but he also commands righteousness. Sha'al rejects the idea that outward identity markers can make a man right before Yahuwah. But he also says guarding the commands of Yahuwah matters. This is why reducing Sha'al to a slogan creates confusion. If the slogan is, Paul said we're under grace, not law, and that slogan is used to mean, therefore transgression doesn't matter, then the slogan has become a trap. Because Sha'al himself asked that exact question and says, let it not be so. The issue is not whether Sha'al taught favor. He absolutely did. The issue is what that favor does. Does favor excuse rebellion, or does favor rescue us from that rebellion? Sha'al answers, favor rescues us from rebellion. Does belief cancel Torah, or does belief establish it? Sha'al answers again, belief establishes the Torah. Does being under favor mean we can transgress? Sha'al answers that. He says, let it not be so. Does the command become wicked because people misuse it, or because the flesh rebels against it? Sha'al answers, the command is set apart, righteous, and good. Does deliverance end in fruitlessness? Sha'al answers that. We are created in Messiah Yahusha for good works. Does Messiah redeem us so we can continue in lawlessness? He says he redeems us from all lawlessness and cleanses the people zealous for good works. That's objective reading. Not a man earning his own deliverance, not a man using favor as permission to rebel, but a rescued man, delivered by favor through belief, being transformed unto obedience, righteousness, and good works. That is why Kapha, or Peter's warning, matters so much. Because Peter said some things in Sha'al's letters are hard to understand, and the untaught and unstable twist them to their own destruction. So when an interpretation of Sha'al turns favor into lawlessness, we should slow down. When an interpretation of Sha'al makes him contradict Yahusha, contradict the prophets, contradict the commandments, and contradict his own letters, we should slow down. Because maybe the problem isn't Sha'al, maybe the problem is the twist. And the twist isn't small. If people are being told that obedience doesn't matter, that the commands are irrelevant, that lawlessness has been baptized under a new name, then this is not a harmless theological disagreement. This affects how people walk. It affects repentance. It affects reverence. It affects whether people hear the warnings of Scripture or explain them away. Sha'al did not give us permission to explain them away. He gave us warnings of his own. He warned that the unrighteous will not inherit the reign of Yahuwah. He warned not to be deceived. He warned that Yahuwah isn't mocked, and whatever a man sows, that shall he also reap. So we cannot take Sha'al, a man who warned against unrighteousness, and turn him into a spokesman for unrighteousness. We cannot take a man who said favor teaches us to deny wickedness and use him to defend wickedness. We cannot take a man who said Messiah redeems us from lawlessness and use him to preach peace with lawlessness. That's not interpretation, it's inversion. And this is why I keep coming back to the same distinction. He's not saying keep commandments so that Yahuwah owes you deliverance. He is saying you have been delivered by favor, so do not return to your chains. He's not saying boast in your works. He's saying walk in the good works Yahuwah prepared. He's not saying trust your flesh. He's saying walk in the Spirit and do not fulfill the desire of the flesh. He's not saying use freedom to serve rebellion. Rather, he says, do not use freedom as an occasion for the flesh. When those distinctions are kept in place, Sha'al becomes much clearer. But when they are collapsed, people create a false choice, either works-based boasting or commandment-rejecting lawlessness. Sha'al rejects both. He gives us a third category, deliverance by favor that produces a set-apart walk. So here's the matter plainly. If someone says Sha'al taught that we are delivered by favor through belief, not by boasting in works, that's true. If someone says Sha'al taught that deliverance produces righteousness, obedience, set-apartness, and good works, that's also true. But if someone says Sha'al taught that favor means the commandments do not matter, that is absolutely false. If someone says Sha'al taught that being under favor allows continued transgression, that is also false. If someone says Sha'al taught that Messiah redeemed us into lawlessness, that is false. His own words refute it time and again. Belief establishes the Torah. Favor is not permission to transgress. The command is set apart, righteous, and good. The inward man delights in the Torah of Yahuwah. Guarding the commands of Yahuwah matters. We are created in Messiah Yahusha for good works. Favor teaches us to reject wickedness and live righteously. Messiah gave himself to redeem us from all lawlessness. So the verdict isn't complicated. Paul, or Sha'al, has been used by many to defend lawlessness, but Sha'al himself refutes it. He didn't preach deliverance by human boasting, and he did not preach deliverance unto rebellion. He preached deliverance by favor through belief from lawlessness unto righteousness, and for good works prepared by Yahuwah. That's the whole point. Not into lawlessness, but from it. Sha'al didn't preach lawlessness, he preached deliverance from it. Ahaba uberakut, Bahashem Yahusha HaMashiach. I love all of y'all. Amen.